Well, hey, Vision. Hey, Greg. Good morning. Welcome to all of you that have made it here with us. Thank you for those of you that have joined us via Facebook Live. We're glad that you're with us. When Matt talked to me earlier this year about speaking as part of the Storymakers series, I was thrilled because I knew right off the bat that I was going to be able to talk about one of my all-time favorite Bible characters, and that is Joseph. It's a story that speaks to me more powerfully than virtually any other Bible story, and I'm hoping that it will speak to you as well. Now, we could literally, and I mean literally, talk for weeks and weeks and weeks about Joseph. But for your sake, I'll keep it to just a few minutes this morning. Now, did I mention that it's a great story? In fact, the story is so great that back in 1975, Andrew Lloyd Webber decided that he would make a musical out of the story called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which debuted back in 75, was on Broadway in 1993 and 1994, and in fact, if you were to go to London today, you could see it being performed. It has been performed in more than 20,000 different venues, schools and amateur theater groups and so forth. Now, some of you may remember it best for the 1999 film version with Donny Osmond as Joseph. Do we have Donny? There he is. Well, there's another one. For those of you that are not as old as I am, and maybe just as hip as I am, there's Donny from 1999. Then you will probably better know Donny Osmond as being the winner of Dancing with the Stars and finishing in second place in The Masked Singer as the Peacock. And some of you are saying, what? Well, anyway, I'm just Donny Osmond then, Donny Osmond now. But that's enough about Donny Osmond. Let's jump in. But before we actually get into the story, we've got to talk a little bit about Joseph's family situation. You will recall last week, Matt talked to us about Abraham and his son Isaac. And now, Jacob, Joseph's father, was Isaac's son. You think, what? So, Joseph was Abraham's great-grandson. So, pretty impressive family lineage there, I would say. But having an impressive family lineage does not automatically make life easy for someone. And in fact, I'm not aware of any family situations more complex than that of Joseph. Now, I am not going to go into it this morning, but in Genesis 29 and 30, we see the story of how Jacob ended up marrying both Leah and her sister Rachel. And so I really work hard at drawing some excellent pictures for you. So I'm trying to give you the whole broad picture here. So we've got Leah and Rachel. And Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved Leah, and everyone, including them, knew it. So in that culture, having children was perhaps the most important and affirming thing that a woman could do, and God saw that Leah was not loved, so he allowed her to have children first. And so Leah had 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Now that upset Rachel a lot, so she had an idea. I'm not having any children, so let me give my servant to my husband, and then she can have children on my behalf with him. So let me just be really clear for all of us that in the universe of bad ideas, this one is right up there. Bad idea. But nonetheless, Bilhah had 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. So we continue on. Now, Leah wasn't having children anymore either, so she thought, if Rachel can do it, I can do it. So she gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob, and we had 2 sons there, Gad and Asher. Then Leah began having children again, and she produced 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and oh, by the way, also had a daughter named Dinah. Now, Rachel, all this time, had not stopped praying to God for her own children. And so God answered Rachel's prayer, and she gave birth to 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. So Joseph is the star of our story today, but I really want you to understand this whole situation that was going on because it played a huge role in what took place. Now, today you can read books and see podcasts or listen to podcasts about blended families and the challenges associated with that. I don't even know where to start with that one. So it's an issue. This was the ultimate dysfunctional family. And what brings us to the start of the story in Genesis 37 is that because Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, Jacob loved Rachel's sons more than the others. And again, everyone knew it. Now, Joseph did not help himself all that much in this situation because in Genesis 37:2, it says that he brought their father a bad report about them, meaning the other brothers. So he was a tattletale, a narc, or whatever you want to call somebody who snitches on others. Now, Jacob wasn't very helpful either because he loved Joseph so much, he decided to give Joseph a richly ornamented robe, commonly known as the coat of many colors. And when the brothers saw this, they hated him all the more and would not speak a kind word to him. Then it says, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Then he told them the contents of his dream. And the contents of the dream was that we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf arose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And then the Bible says, say it with me, they hated him all the more. So then he had another dream. And this dream was that the sun and the moon and the stars, referring to his brothers, were going to bow down to him. Now, those dreams were given to him by God, and they absolutely 100% came to pass. But that was not really received very well by the brothers. Maybe should not have been shared with them just at that moment. So as the list of bad choices adds up, let's add another one to it. Jacob decides to send Joseph out into the fields to check on the brothers. So as they see Joseph coming toward them, they say, here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Now, these are some stand-up guys, I'll have you know. Let's kill him and tell our father that some animal ate him. Now, the oldest one, Reuben, thought that, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. So he suggested, let's just throw him in the hole, and then I'll come back later and pull him out. But when he wasn't looking, the other brothers saw some men from Gilead traveling by, and they had a great idea. Let's pull him out of the hole and sell him as a slave. Good plan, guys. So let's stop for just a second. I know there's a lot of moving parts to this story. Let's summarize. First, Joseph had dreams that were given to him by God that he was going to be a powerful ruler. So powerful that his brothers and even his father were going to bow down to him. But instead, at this moment in the story, he is on his way to Egypt, having been sold by his brothers for 8 ounces of silver. Now, this isn't all that terrible because there had been 3 options presented to him. Option 1, be killed and get chucked in a hole. Option 2, just get chucked in a hole. Option 3, get chucked in a hole, get pulled out, and then be sold as a slave. So Joseph was fortunate. He got to choose door 3, and now he was on his way to Egypt as a slave. And the 11 other boys went back and said, "Oh, our brother is dead and an animal killed him." Now, Joseph, fortunately, was away from his toxic family. But he was a long, long, long way from where he had envisioned and God had told him that he would be. So the story continues. Joseph arrives in Egypt, and he happens to be sold to a high official in Egypt named Potiphar. Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. Now, this is not, let me be really clear, this is not where Joseph thought that he would be. But listen to what the Bible says about the situation. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Now, let me again emphasize, this is not what Joseph had planned, but it seemed to be working out pretty well. And you know what, to be honest with you, I'm a little bit jealous of Joseph, because in Genesis 39:6, the Bible says that Joseph was well-built and handsome. Now, if only somebody would say that about me. I mean, put it in the Bible, good grief. But that turned out to be a problem, because it says, after a while, his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Now, let's be honest, guys. If you're the average male, you're thinking, wow, this is an improvement in my situation. I have been sold as a slave, but now I've got this hottie chasing after me. But that's not the way that Joseph saw it. When she propositioned him, it says that he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. Now, that's a very good and instructive lesson for us men when we face situations of that type. But unfortunately, things still did not go well. One day, he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the other servants in the household was inside. She caught him when she caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to make sport of us. He came here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave that you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When the master heard the story that his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So, again, let me summarize. First, Joseph is sold as a slave by his brothers. Joseph overcomes that situation, becomes the head servant in Potiphar's house. This lying liar of a boss's wife falsely accuses him of wrongdoing that he specifically went out of his way to avoid. So he then ends up in Pharaoh's jail. He's a long way from home, quite literally, and he's also a very, very long way from what he believed that God wanted and had for him. But even all of this has not stopped Joseph from being successful where he was. It says in Genesis, "But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden." So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So again, because I am such an expert artist, I've provided for you another drawing that kind of illustrates what's gone on so far. So at the beginning of the story, we start off at the top. We are part of a large family in the lineage of Abraham, and we are the favored son. And then we take a dive down into a ditch, and then eventually get sold to a group of men going to Egypt. So we get to Egypt, and we go back up again. We are now head of Potiphar's house. So we're living a fairly comfortable life with a great deal of responsibility. But then the wife comes after him, and we take another dive down again. And so we're now in prison in Egypt, in Pharaoh's prison. And you think up and down and up and down. And so he's down again, but even that doesn't stop him from being successful where he was. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him and showed him kindness and granted him favor. I've already been there, haven't I? I'm reading you a verse that I've already read you, but it's a really important verse. So here we are in the prison. Joseph's there, and he encounters two gentlemen. There's the cupbearer and the baker. These were servants of Pharaoh who had in some way ticked Pharaoh off. So being the ultimate, really reasonable guy that he was, he threw them in prison. Now, we don't know how long they were there, but during this time, Joseph was responsible for these two. And they shared with him that they had had a dream. So they said to Joseph, "We don't know what this dream means." So Joseph says, "Well, tell me your dream and I'll explain it to you." And so Joseph told the cupbearer his dream, and he was going to be reinstated to his high-level job in just 3 days. And after he said that, the cupbearer says, "Wow, sounds pretty good to me." And Joseph said to him as he was about to go on his way and celebrate that I'm going to be reinstated in 3 days, Joseph said to him, "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Seems like a pretty reasonable request to me. And then things happened just as Joseph said that they would happen. The cupbearer got reinstated to his role with the Pharaoh. But then we see in Genesis chapter 40, verse 23, one of the saddest and yet predictable things happened to Joseph. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Now, when we read stories from the Bible, we often think, well, they're just characters, they're just stories. But in reality, these were real people with real experiences and with real feelings. And so stop for a minute and think, How would I feel if I were in Joseph's shoes, riding the roller coaster of success to hardship, to success to hardship, still being a long, long way from where God was going to have me be? If it were me, I'd be thinking, God, get me off this roller coaster. I'm getting sick. Enough of the up and down. God, I want you to play out your dreams for me, the one that you gave me. I am tired of being in prisons for things that I didn't do. And then, according to Genesis 41:1, 2 more years passed, with Joseph being the chief of staff in Pharaoh's prison. And then a life-changing event occurred, not only for Joseph, not only for the population of Egypt, but for the entire population of that region of the known world. Pharaoh was having dreams, and his in-house staff of dream interpreters just wasn't getting the job done. They had nothing. And so at that moment, the cupbearer said, "Hey, I know a guy." Finally remembering Joseph. And so he made a call to the Egyptian bullpen of dream interpreters, which happened to be the prison, and they got Joseph. Now they had to clean him up first, and Joseph came and interpreted the dreams and indicated that there was going to be 7 years of the most productive agricultural time in the history of the nation, to be followed by 7 years of the worst famine ever known, and it was going to be so severe that they would forget all about the good times. So then it's kind of odd in the story. It happens so quickly you almost don't notice it, that Joseph shifts his role from dream interpreter to operations consultant. He says to Pharaoh, "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held and reserved for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." You just cannot make this stuff up. Chucked in a hole, pulled out of a hole, sold into slavery, taken to Egypt, become a leadership in your role at Potiphar's house, chucked into the prison for allegations that you did not commit. And now you're second in charge of all of Egypt. He's reached the top. He's reached the place of what his dream predicted that he would be. But he was still affected by what had happened to him. We know that because in Genesis 41, when Joseph had his first son, he named him Manasseh, which sounds like the Hebrew word for forget. And Joseph did this because it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. So he's on top of the world, but he's still thinking about them. And then his second son was named Ephraim, which sounds like twice fruitful. And Joseph said about him, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." And we can get even more insight into what was going on in Joseph's heart and Joseph's mind when we see his interaction with his brothers. Now, I mentioned to you that the famine was going to be so terrible that it was going to affect all the nations around. So Jacob and all his family, they ran out of food. Who had the food? Egypt had the food. And Joseph was in charge of the food. So in Genesis 42, 43, and 44, we see some kind of odd interactions where Joseph didn't seem quite sure as to how to respond to his brothers when they came to him for food. They didn't recognize him. Heaven knows they didn't expect him to be second in charge of Egypt. But finally, he decided that he would show himself to them. He said to them, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of Egypt." So this kind of seems like the traditional end to a wonderful Lifetime movie, that there's family reunification and everybody's happy and all is well. But we have that little twist at the end. Eventually, Jacob dies, and the brothers are scared because they think Joseph has been nice to us only because of our father. So now that father's gone, he's going to get us. And they came to him, and Joseph said these remarkable words, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many things that we can learn from the life of Joseph. Diligence, responsibility, integrity, wisdom, hard work, forgiveness, and on and on. But for the rest of today's message, I'd like to focus on one thing that is consistent throughout the story of Joseph. And that one thing is the theme of disappointment. Just to be clear, disappointment occurs when there is a gap between what we desire or what we think things should be and what things really are. And when there's a gap between what is and what we think it should be, there's disappointment. And when you look at Joseph's story, there is disappointment all over the place. First, let's talk about disappointment in his family. I think it's fair to say that Joseph was perhaps a little bit disappointed in his brothers. He did not want them to chuck him in a hole. He was disappointed in them. And just when you thought that things were going to be better and these guys are going to redeem themselves, they then sell him into slavery. Then Joseph had disappointment in his employer. According to Genesis 39, Joseph had tremendous success in all that he did, and as a result, Potiphar's house experienced tremendous blessing and success. And so Joseph was put in charge of everything. But then Potiphar's wife got involved and came chasing after Joseph time and time again, over and over, and Joseph said no, 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 until one day she had him cornered, and she was able to frame him. Now, let's think about this for a little bit. It's my hunch that Potiphar's wife wasn't perhaps the most upstanding of ladies. This was probably not the first time that she had done this kind of thing. So when Potiphar hears this story and compares his wife's probable previous behavior and the behavior of Joseph, you would expect him to have a little bit more favoritism toward Joseph, but no. He believed his wife and threw Joseph in prison. And then third, Joseph was disappointed in his friend. Joseph was in Pharaoh's prison, and he came in contact with two direct servants of Pharaoh himself. Now, the cupbearer was kind of a real low-tech security guy. The cupbearer would bring the drinks to Pharaoh, and because they didn't have any means of testing, the cupbearer would drink it first, and if he didn't keel over dead, then Pharaoh would drink it. That's fine for Pharaoh, not so good for the cupbearer. But Joseph told the cupbearer the outcome of his dream, which was he was going to be restored to his position. And Joseph asked Pharaoh, or asked the cupbearer to talk to Pharaoh about him, but he forgot. Now, I know some of your stories very well. Most of you, I don't. I've got absolutely no idea. But I know that when we get this number of people in a room, there will have been a lot of cumulative disappointment. Some of you have been severely disappointed in your family. Some of you have experienced perhaps even unspeakable abuse at their hands, and it still affects you. You want to move past it, but you just can't seem to. Or you may have worked somewhere for years and years, and then one day you get called into the office, and those years and years of loyalty, they're gone. Or worse, they accuse you of doing something that you didn't do and fire you on the spot. Or you've had a friend that you counted on for years and years, and they have disappointed you in a way that cuts you to the core. You thought that they would support you no matter what, and when you needed them the most, they were not there. And you're disappointed. See, here's part of the problem. Throughout all of Joseph's story, there was a constant factor. And that constant factor was that Joseph was disappointed by people. And I think in most cases, when you're disappointed by people as well. And when I was going through the first workings of this message, I thought I would start off with, people may disappoint you. And then I thought, no, that's not really accurate. It really should be, people will disappoint you. And then I thought, well, that sounds a little cynical. True, but it sounds a little cynical. So I thought, well, let's wait just a little bit and give some context to the situation. But the fact of the matter is that people will disappoint you. Why? Because people are people. Why do you expect others to disregard their sinful nature and to treat you perfectly at all times when you don't necessarily disregard your sinful nature and treat other people as they want to be treated at all times? Now, if you expect me right now to give you the 3 easy steps to overcoming disappointment like Joseph did, you're going to be disappointed. But I do want to draw your attention to a couple of key points. First, let me be just really super clear. Overcoming disappointment is not easy. But at the same time, it's not complex. Only 2 real major points I want to draw to your attention here. First one is something that's mentioned consistently through the story. Genesis 39:2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Genesis 39:3. When the master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes. Genesis 39:21. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Genesis 39:23. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. That's it. God was with Joseph. Even Stephen, one of the early church leaders, in his first and last sermon, pointed this out. He said about Joseph, because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. But God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. Now, one element that allowed Joseph to succeed was God was with him. But, when you think about it, that by itself is not that big a deal because that is a promise of God. God told Joshua when he was taking over leadership from Moses, he said in Joshua 1:5, "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." And the writer to the Hebrews takes those words and applies them directly to our lives in 2019 when he said, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.'" God is with us, but I try to put myself in Joseph's shoes, and the question I would ask him would be, Joseph, God was with you, but how did you not get frustrated? How did you not get disappointed? You had to be frustrated and disappointed with the people in your life, but how did you keep from letting that migrate into being disappointed with God? Think about it. At age 17, Joseph was given a dream that he was going to be an incredible, powerful ruler with power and authority. Then he's thrown into a hole. Then he's sold into slavery. Then he becomes a leader. Then he's thrown into prison. Then he becomes second in charge of Egypt. Don't forget, and sometimes we skip over it when we read the Bible, he was 17 when he was given the dream. He was age 30 at the time that he became second in charge of Egypt. So there were 13 years from the time of the dream to its fulfillment. And let's be really super clear, those were not 13 easy years. So how did he not begin to doubt and become disappointed in God? And as I study the story and as I study God's word, I see that there are two critical elements. First, we need to take action that is in front of us. We need to do what we can do to the very best of our ability. And, number two, we need to hold tight to the fact that God is good and that God is trustworthy. Joseph could have blown up this story at any point. He could have said at Potiphar's house, "I'm not serving you, do it yourself." Or he could have said, "Those guys forgot me, I'm not going to do anything to help out here in Pharaoh's prison." Or he could have said, "You know what? Pharaoh has mistreated me. I'm not going to help him by giving him any advice." And if that's what he had chosen to do at any point in the story, things would have stopped and the dream would not have come to pass. The other piece that made this whole thing possible is that he continued to trust God. I don't think any of this could have made any sense to Joseph. When he saw and experienced that which was completely inconsistent with what he had thought was going to happen, he stuck with God. He continued to work hard. He continued to trust. And God elevated him to the position that God wanted for him. At any point, Joseph could have said, God, I've had enough. I don't think you have my best interests at heart. I don't think you're as good as I thought you were. But he didn't. You know, being hurt by other people can cause us to begin to have doubt in God. God, why did you let this thing happen? Why did you let these people hurt me so? And the fact is that the Bible is very clear that God is not just kind of good. God is just not kind of trustworthy. Either he is good or he is not. Either he is trustworthy or he is not. There is no middle ground. You can see that with the psalmists, whether it was David or Asaph, they were sure. Psalm 27, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 25:1, in you, Lord my God, I put my trust. And in Psalm 31:14, but I trust in you, Lord, I say, you are my God. One reason that we can become so disappointed in God is that we mistake our lack of knowledge and interpret that wrongly as abandonment by God. Please do not allow the limitations of your knowledge to cause you to throw in the towel with God. Some of you, as I mentioned, have experienced tremendous pain because of choices you made or because of actions and choices of other people. And I am so sorry that that happened to you. If I could change what happened to you, I would. And please know that these things that happened to you were not God's will. They were the result of actions and choices of either you or others. And that's what brings us to our bottom line. And our bottom line is this: even God can't change the past, but he certainly can redeem it. Those things that happened, they happened. We can't undo it. And in God's economy, for whatever reason, God doesn't erase the past. It's still there. But we must remember that God can take the most horrible, the most awful situation and make something good out of it. That's what he did for Joseph. That's what he did for the people of Egypt through Joseph. And that's what he can do for you. Is that easy? Oh, no. No way. But if we do the two things we need to do what God has put in front of you to do, and two, trust him. Even if we don't understand, even if it doesn't seem fair, hold on to trust him. And I assure you that you will see God's power in your life. And God will take your circumstances and redeem them, make something beautiful out of them for his glory.